Today we look at a situation of prayer that isn't like most of the others that we'll look at. Um, for the reasoning behind that is the book of Esther does not mention anywhere God. Doesn't even mention the word prayer anywhere. But as we'll see and we look at this, there are some places where things are implied, but there are some places where things were left out because that's how they interpreted the time. So we pick up the story to give you a little bit of a background information on this story, and we'll kind of hit a couple of the cliff notes because I'm going to go through the whole book of Esther in one message. So I promise you won't be here like till 1. I'll get you out before that. But King Xerxes, the king of the Persian Empire, he throws a party, and it's just not a small party. He throws a bash, a 6 month long party. Anybody want to party for that long? Like, I'm exhausted after like a couple hours, let alone 6 months. But just to close out the bash, he throws another party for a week. And at this second party, he invites all of the people of Susa, where he is kind of the main place where the king is in Persia. And at this party, King Xerxes calls his wife to come out to the party because she wasn't at the party yet. So he calls his wife, the queen, Vashti, to come out to the party because he wants to show her off. He wants to show everyone how beautiful his queen is. And so he wants to show her off. And well, Vashti, for whatever reason, decides, I'm not going to be part of your fun tonight. I'm not coming. And she does a few things by saying that. One, it's not very honorable to deny your husband anything in that culture. So if husband says do it, you do it. So rule number 1 broken. And it wasn't just that she was denying her husband, but she was also denying the king. And you do what the king tells you, whether you like it or not. And so she was literally breaking one of the laws of that time. And so the king says, okay, well, if you're going to embarrass me, well, you just won't be queen anymore. So he just kind of pushes her to the side and decides, hey, I'm king. I can have anyone I want. So he sends out his royal officials into the land of Persia to find the prettiest women that he can find. And he puts on a beauty contest throughout the land of Persia to find the one prettiest woman in the land to be his new queen. Well, if we rewind just a little bit before that, the Babylonians had conquered Judea in the 6th century and had taken the Jews back to Babylon. But then in 539 BC, the Persians conquered the Babylonians. And they released the Jews to return back to Jerusalem. But for whatever reason, some of the Jews decided to stay back and stay in now the Persian land. And so we find that one of the people that stayed was a Jew named Mordecai. Mordecai isn't really necessarily in the scriptures given a title, but some believe that he was one of the kind of a high-ranking Jewish leader. He had some form of authority because we find throughout the book of Esther that other Jews followed him. If he did something, they in turn would follow and do the same. And well, Mordecai actually raised a young woman who had no father and mother. And he took this young lady into his home and he taught her the ways of a proper Jew. And so she was raised as a Jew, and this young woman was named Esther. And so he raises Esther to honor God with the Jewish customs, the Jewish traditions and laws that the Jews kept. Well, when the Persian officials go throughout the land, they find Esther. And she's beautiful. And so they bring her back, but Mordecai hides the fact that she's a Jew, because they know that they won't allow a Jew to be in an official capacity as such as queen. And so they hide the secret, and Esther never says that she is a Jew and that Mordecai was her father. And so before long, Esther is drafted number 1 in the King Xerxes queen contest and becomes the new queen. And so she becomes the queen, and now she has some power. Well, there was also another man that came up in the power circles of things, and his name was Haman. And Haman became the right-hand man to King Xerxes, and he became the most powerful man other than the king. And one of the laws stated that whenever Haman walked into your presence, you were to bow down in front of him. You were to bow down in front of him. Well, Haman decided that he wanted to get rid of some people, and that he wanted to set this conspiracy in place. And Mordecai overheard this conspiracy, and so he goes and he tells Esther about this conspiracy that's going to take place, and tells Esther exactly what is going to happen. And so Esther goes to the king and tells the king, this is what's going to happen, and gives Mordecai the credit. And Mordecai just is recorded in the Chronicles, and the King Xerxes takes care of the situation. This is Cliff Notes version, very Cliff Notes version. King Xerxes takes care of the situation. If you like gory movies, like where everyone's getting killed left and right, read the book of Esther. It's if you're a man, it's a good read. Back to the point here. So Mordecai uncovers this conspiracy that's to take place. So the king has some honor for Mordecai. But however, whenever Haman goes past the king's gate, all the people would bow down and they would honor Haman, except for Mordecai. He refused to bow down, because to a Jew to bow down to anything other than God was to create Haman as an idol and to worship him. I mean, to literally take a posture of bowing down on the ground in front of a person. And he was not going to elevate Haman to the status of a god. And so Haman decides that he does not like Mordecai. But because he does not like Mordecai, he hates the Jews. And so he sets this plan in motion to get rid of all of the Jews, to just kill them all. And it was going to be on a certain specific day that all of the troops and soldiers were going to go out in the land, and no matter what, if they were man, woman, child, if they were Jewish, they were going to be killed. The king did not yet know about this plot. Mordecai, when he finds out about this, says that he tears his clothes and he begins to mourn, and he goes out into the public square, and he goes out right in front of the king's gate, because he couldn't go. You can't be a mourner and enter the king's gate, because if the king did not want sadness around him. So he made a gate that separated him from any sadness that would go on. So Mordecai couldn't go past the king's gate, but he goes to the most public place that he can find. And he's mourning for the people, the Jewish people. And the Jews just start gathering at the king's gate and mourning. They don't even really know what they're mourning for, but this is the part where we believe that Mordecai has some Jewish power within the Jewish culture, because people are just mourning and they don't even know what they're mourning about. They're just following what Mordecai is doing himself. And so Esther finds out that Mordecai is grieving at the king's gate, and so she sends one of her servants out to find out what's going on with Mordecai, and Mordecai sends back the message to the servant that he's heard about the plot to get rid of all of the Jewish people, and that Haman plans to kill all of the Jews. And this worries Esther because it's her people. But at the same time, she can't tell the king that she's a Jew, or she herself will be killed. But Mordecai pleads with her, please, please go to the king and tell him you're the queen. If you just tell him that you're a Jew and what Haman plans to do to the Jewish people, he will get rid of Haman, and he'll take care of the situation, and he won't allow Haman to get rid of the Jews. And the first time she says no. But eventually she gives in to Haman. And this is what she says to Mordecai. Chapter 4, verse 16. Esther says, "Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." Well, in that time, it was actually against the law to go into the king's chamber if you were not summoned by the king. So the only way to stand before the king was if he said, "I want to talk to the queen." So one day, she tells him, "Okay, I'll go. But if I perish, I perish." She goes to the king. And the king is actually pleased to see her out in the crowd as he's governing over the people. And he actually calls her forward. And so she actually gets to talk to the king. And the king says, "Whatever it is you want, up to half of the kingdom, it will be yours." And she simply says, "I would like for you and Haman to come and join me for a banquet." She wants to sit down and have dinner with Haman and the king. Well, meanwhile, Haman feels all good about himself because Esther, the queen, wants only me. What bigger honor could I possibly get? I mean, I'm already the second greatest person in the kingdom, but hey, if the queen wants to honor me, I'm going to go. Well, that night, the king couldn't sleep. And so he, like some of us, he went out to the chronicles of everything in the kingdom that has happened, that has taken place, is recorded in the king's chronicles. And so he needs a little material to help him put him to sleep. So he's reading through the chronicles, and he comes to the conspiracy that Mordecai had uncovered and had actually saved the king's life. And so the king realizes, hey, he has not been honored for what he did. I need to honor him. And so the next day in the morning, he calls Haman in, and he begins to ask him some questions. I love this. This is great. In chapter 6, verse 6, it says, "When Haman entered, the king asked him, 'What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?'" Well, Haman's thinking, "Oh, this is good. I get to pick what's going to happen to me and how I'm going to be honored." So he begins to say, this is what needs to happen. Now Haman thought to himself, "Who is there that the king would rather honor than me?" So he answered the king, "For the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and the horse be entrusted to the one on the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and let him lead the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, 'This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.' Go at once," the king commanded to Haman. "Get the robe and the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended." So Haman got the robe and the horse. He robed Mordecai, because remember he said the most highest honored person is supposed to put the robe on. It gets even better. And led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." Afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief. But it gets even better. So the banquet comes. And they're sitting there, just Haman, the king, and Esther. And Esther begins to tell the king of Haman's plot to kill the Jews. And Esther relinquishes that she is also a Jew, and that it's her people that he's trying to kill. Well, Haman had actually had a impalement device created for Mordecai because he wanted to have Mordecai killed in public. Well, the king decides that that's not for Mordecai, that's actually for Haman. And so Haman is the one that is killed and not Mordecai. And Mordecai, get this, takes the place of Haman as the second greatest in the land. So why this story? Well, there's many more good things behind this story. I encourage you to read it. It's not a long read. But Esther had some decisions to make. You see, Esther wasn't a mother in the sense that she had her own children, but she was the mother of really a nation, because she literally represented the Jewish people as the queen of the land. And so she could have sat back and said nothing and watched all of her people be killed, and she could have watched her father figure be killed and possibly be killed herself. But she decided that she wanted to honor Mordecai. She wanted to honor who she was, and she wasn't going to back down from that. One of the things that I think it comes with motherhood is one of the things we notice about Esther is when she said, "When this is done, after we have fasted for 3 days, I will go to the king, even though it's against the law and even though I could possibly be killed for this." But she says, "If I die, I die." Sometimes for mothers, you have to bend the rules. You have to maybe break the law. And am I encouraging every mother to go break the law? No, please don't hear that. What I'm saying is sometimes for the love of your child, to protect the children you love, you have to go to extreme measures. You have to do things that people won't understand why you're doing them. But you do them whether people understand it or know or get why you're doing it for one reason, and that is because you love your child. There's no greater gift that a mother has than to model God before their children. And it's because of you. It's because of mothers that children are able to see who God is. Fathers, you'll get your chance in a few weeks. But we're just talking about mothers right now. But you have a privilege. You have an honor bestowed upon you that you get, no one else. Because God has placed these children in your life for you to mother. No one else, just you. When you look around churches today, you don't see very many men bringing just their children to church. You see women bringing just their children to church. So for many people growing up, your godly influence was your mother. And because of situations like that, children interpret their God based on who it is that is influencing them. So the way that your children view God has a lot to do with how you have taught them, how you've raised them. Now let me add this little injecture there. There are plenty of times and stories and situations that we can say where we've loved our children, we've tried to do everything, we've honored God with our lives, we've done everything that we could do to help this child, to teach them what the difference between right and wrong. But for whatever reason, they grew up and that is not the person I taught them to be. They don't act like that. But for whatever reason, they've chosen not to listen. Does that mean you are a bad mother? No. Not in the least bit. If the way you raised your child was to honor God. Now, if we reverse that situation and we bring a child into a situation and they've grown and they've become something that does not honor God and they don't honor God with their lives, but we look back and we look at their parental figures in their life and they clearly do not honor God in their life, can we say that their influence could have heavily influenced who they have become? Yes, I 100% believe. I mean, we're a product of our culture. We're a product of the image that is bestowed upon us. But being a mother is a gift. I don't think being a mother ends the second your kids grow up and they leave the house. I don't think any mother would debate that with me. I think they worry even more when the child leaves the house. But it's that love that calls them and makes sure that they're okay. It's that love that questions every decision they're about to make. It's because you love us. In this story, God is not mentioned in the book. In the book of Esther. But there's an important thing that you need to realize is that just because God is silent does not mean he's not there. Just because God is silent does not mean that he's not there. A few years ago, there was a school shooting that took place. I think, what you tell me, it was Sandy Hook? It was an elementary school, wasn't it? Yeah, Sandy Hook Elementary School. All through the news, I kept hearing this phrase said, "Where was God? Where was God?" And then I heard another story about this teacher of one of the classes had taken all of her kids and she shoved them in a closet and she locked the door behind her and she went out into the classroom and she confronted the shooters and she was killed. But because she was killed and they saw an empty classroom, all of the kids were saved because of her actions. So I quickly went on my blog and I wrote out this message and said God was there. Because you're looking for God and you're looking at the shooter. When I'm looking at God, I look for the Savior. God was there that day. In this story of Esther, where was God? God was in Esther. He was using her to save not just a family, not just her siblings or her kids, but a nation. Don't legitimize or limit the power of mother, of being a mother. You shape and mold us into the people you want us to be, into the people you believe God has created us to be. I hear people all the time say, my kids don't want to go to church, and I'm not going to force them. I'm not going to force my kids to go to church. Like, okay. Don't expect them to go to church when they grow up. People just look at me like, what do you mean? They'll go to church if they want to because I want it to be their decision. I'm like, they won't go. Maybe if like you die early or something, it's like a crisis situation and they might possibly go during, but they're just not going to walk into a church one day if they don't realize that the church is a safe place for them to go where they can be loved and they can learn from God and grow closer in their faith to God if that hasn't been modeled for them. And the only way for you to model for them is to drag their butt to church. And I know some people hear that and they say, well, that's harsh. What do we... Okay, I grew up Catholic. If the doors were open, I was there. I did not like it. I dreaded the days when we had to go. It was the same thing every Sunday. This is not boring. Trust me. My messages maybe, but not the whole... But my faith is what it is today because my mom took me to church whether I liked it or not because she wanted me to know who God was. And she was going to model for me what it meant to be a faithful believer in God. I won't get into that. But it's because of her influence. Eventually, when I was in high school, my dad started going to church more. And now my mom's not as healthy as my dad, and so my dad still goes to church when my mom can't. Why is that? Because he had a faithful wife that no matter what, whether she was sick or not, she was at church. And it's because of my mom that my faith is what it is today. If they live under your roof, you're the one that has the power. what better chance do you have to model for your children, your grandchildren, how to honor God? That's when we've done children's church in the past, one of the main reasons why I want the kids in the sanctuary for the words, for the singing, the music and everything, and they leave during the message when I'll put them to sleep, because the experience of a child being able to watch their loved one worship. Because you're teaching them, you're showing them, this is how you honor God. This is how you give God praise and thanks for the things that He's done for you in your life. Will they understand it at that age? No, probably not. But when they get older, oh yeah, they will. I'm amazed by the things that, my kids are up there playing right now. I'm fine with that. But Samantha will tell me things I said. She picks up on it. She hears it. Kaylin quotes me from like 3 years ago, and I don't even have a clue that he pays attention to anything. But they're seeing it. You have an influence. Take the opportunity that you have, because the second they're gone, the second they're out of the house, you don't get to tell them you're going to church. Because then they get to say, That's when you pray. You never give up on them. If you want to hear a good story about never giving up on someone, talk to Mel 6. She has a pretty cool story about her son. But Mother, I just want to thank you. Because, it's true. I'm being honest, my mom influenced me. And it was because my mom said, I don't care what my husband does, because he's an adult, I can't make him. But you know what? I'm going to model what it means to love God, and I'm going to model what it means to be a faithful believer, and I'm going to model what it means to be a faithful member of a church. And I'm going, and my kids are going. And it was because of that my father ended up going. And wives, I'll go even further than just Mother's Day here. Wives, don't give up on your husbands. If you're here and you're married and your husband is not here, don't give up on him. Pray for him like crazy. We talked about last week the difference between God be with, your husband. Pray, God, make your presence known to this man. May he come to know who you are. Powerful. Don't give up, because you have so much influence. But thank you, mothers. We come and we say, hey, you can have a flower, and we have a cool snack for you or whatever. But it doesn't even do it justice. I kind of feel silly sometimes, doing these things on Mother's Day and Father's Day. It's like, woohoo, you get one day. It's like we give Jesus one day, Christmas, and that's it. And you know what? Tomorrow's Monday. It's not Mother's Day. Call your mom. Say thank you. I need to do that more. I need to do that to my wife more. But I'll stop rattling on. Thank you, mothers.